Welcome back to another video, boys, and today we're going to be taking a look at the spookiest, the scariest class in the game. We're going to take a look at the Necromancer today, and we're going to be going over the top 3 builds. Dare I say, actually, the only 3 builds that you need to know about for the rest of the season. Now, as always, I have one small ask. If you like the video, consider giving it a like, and I don't know, maybe hit that subscribe button. Couldn't hurt, right? And one more thing, just before we get started, don't forget to go check out the awesome content creators who provided the gameplay showcases for this video. I'll leave links down to all of their socials below, as well as links to each of these builds so that you can follow them along if you see one that you like. Kicking this list off, we have Ebonblight. Now, this build is for those of you who don't really like playing the minion build and prefer something that absolutely melts all of the enemies around you with devastating damage over time. The first great thing about this build is that it has a pretty low gear requirement. You'll obviously need the Ebonblight unique amulet. It's built around that, but other than that, you can get away very easily with having absolutely no other uniques in this build whatsoever and still push really high. And as far as pushing goes, for those of you who are interested, this build has done like a 119, a 120 in pit without Holy Bolt, so it's absolutely no slouch when it comes to pushing the hardest content in the game. And because of the pretty straightforward playstyle, you can easily use this as a speed farmer as well. So a very good build if you're looking for a can-do-it-all type kit. And as you can imagine, because it's able to push into these really high levels, it is of course really tanky, as well as having super high DPS. As far as the playstyle goes, there are a few minor variations of this build, but for the most part, the general gameplay loop will remain the same. You run around spamming Decrepify, you spam Blight, and Corpse Tendrils to group enemies up, of course. One of the best gathering skills in the entire game. Honestly, I'm super jealous. I love playing my Necromancer just for this skill. And then you weave in Corpse Explosions for when you need that extra damage. You're just looking to cast as many spells really to get that blighted stacking up and getting that dot really ticking. I mean, it's not unusual to see damage ticks into the millions, tens of millions, and all the way up to, and bear in mind this is like the absolute most cracked gear, but up into the hundreds of millions. Now, one last thing you do want to just remember about the rotation is that you do want to keep casting Corpse Explosion. You got to remember that you're using Grim Harvest with this build, which means that is your primary way of recovering your essence. So you need to detonate those corpses to get that essence back. Make sure you're doing that or you will run into resource issues. But as long as you do, this build is pretty much resource free, allowing you to just mindlessly cast your spells basically forever. So, I mean, all in all, it's a really easy recommendation for those of you who are not looking to play minions. Instead, if you prefer that more warlocky shadow damage over time playstyle, which plays a bit more like a true ranged magic caster class, then this is definitely going to be the one for you. Now, moving on to the second build, and this is of course a minion build. The Necromancer minion builds have been absolutely crushing this season, and we're going to be first talking about the Skeletal Mage or the Shadow Mage variation of the build first, because though it's very close, this one is slightly behind the rank 1 build. But yeah, let's quickly cover what makes this one so good. So first and foremost, the Shadow Mages hit like absolute trains. They hit really hard. And this is in part thanks to the fact that we can actually stack ranks of Skeletal with Mage Mastery on the gear, giving us absolutely huge damage multipliers for this minion type. But generally just speaking, minions hit really hard this season, so even with like crappy gear, they're ridiculously powerful. And speaking of gear, the gear requirements for this build are actually surprisingly low. You do need the right aspects, but other than that, there really isn't a unique requirement whatsoever. I mean, Ethereal's Might is great if you want to be super tanky, so you can push into those super high tiers. And by the way, this build is like able to do like 125 plus, so definitely a high performer in that regard. But the fact that you don't need any uniques is pretty crazy. Once you hit all of your aspects, which you can do from, like, say, farming Helltides for a couple of hours, you're then just ready to go. At that point, you're just kind of, you know, trying to reroll your gear, making sure you're getting the right masterworks, but your barrier to entry is much lower than with pretty much like 90% of the S tier builds across all the classes. As far as playstyle goes, it's pretty straightforward, and actually one of my favorite playstyles for just speed farming and stuff like that, because it's what I call like hit and run. You just kind of like tag enemies up, run past, and your minions kill them all for you, which is great. But we'll be using Decrepify to start, to curse all the enemies and apply Abhorrent Decrepify, which then gives our minion attacks the chance to actually reduce our cooldowns, which seems to be bugged at the moment, giving us absolutely absurd cooldown reduction, meaning this just turns a class into kind of like a whack-a-mole, where you're just trying to press everything fast enough that you're not really wasting too much of your cooldowns. On that note as well, you do have like practically a 100% uptime on the Army of the Dead ultimate, which just means pure chaos and insane DPS, so lots of fun to be had there. Another thing that you're going to want to be trying to do is make sure you're hitting the tougher enemies with Blight. This is another damage multiplier for you, just stacking damage on damage on damage. Of course, you're going to be using Corpse Tendrils. It's OP. It's fucking great. I love it. And you have Blood Mist, therefore, when you need the defensive to get out of the kind of, you know, oh shit, I'm in trouble situations. And like with the Blight build before, you do want to make sure you're consuming lots of corpses to get your essence up so that you can cast Blight. You do this by using Skeletal Priest, which also buffs your minions a shit ton, and then of course the Corpse Tendrils themselves. Naturally, as you'd expect from a build this powerful, it is very, very tanky in addition to all of the damage that it has. One thing that really helps with this is that because we're focusing on the Skeletal Mages and we're using the passive Hellbent Commander that requires us to stand next to our enemies to, you know, get their damage up, they're not in the fight, right? They're outside the fight. They're away, hopefully standing somewhere a little bit more safe, meaning that we are also standing somewhere a little bit safe. Now, the Necromancer is squishy, but no means just a paper bag. They are fairly chunky, but yeah, I mean, it's nice to not have to stand in the middle of everything, because, you know, it's just safer out here, right? So as far as it goes, in summary, absolutely insanely OP. Really active playstyle, because you have like basically no cooldowns whatsoever, insane damage, and it's a ranged version of the minion builds, meaning for those of you who prefer not to be in the middle of the fight, this is definitely the variation that you're going to want to pick up. Now, moving on to the rank 1 build, the final build on this list, and it is the Golem minion build. And it is super close. It's seriously close in terms of how these builds are performing in-game. I think as far as the leaderboards went, there was like literally nothing between these two. However, the Golem one did eke out a win in most scenarios by a very small margin. I do find that with general play and especially leveling, this one was a bit more usable, because you're able to somewhat control where the minions do their damage, because you're using the Iron Golem that does the slam, and it will come and sort of do the slam next to you on the enemies that you're attacking, so that, you know, there's not quite a reliance on the AI to be killing the right things at the right time. Other than that, it does play practically the same. However, you are dropping Blight, so you don't have that skill to press anymore. Instead, you'll just be running around to apply Abhorrent Decrepify to get all of that lucky hit chance cooldown stuff. You'll then also still be spamming Skeletal Priest to buff all of your minions, as well as spamming the, you know, the Golem active skill, as well as Army of the Dead. But yeah, I mean, all in all, very similar in a lot of ways. And that goes for gear as well. I mean, again, you're using basically a very similar setup here. A couple of the tempers are going to be different. Of course, you're going to be going into Golem damage as opposed to like Skeletal Mage damage. You, again, don't really need any uniques. You can get away with perhaps using like a Tyrael's Might as you push into those higher tiers, but you definitely do not need them whatsoever. One thing I really like about this build, though, is the synergy between the Corpse Tendrils and then the Golem Smash. My god, that combo is abso-fucking-lutely beautiful. But it does come with one minor drawback, and that is, in order to make sure that your Hellbent Commander uptime is good, you do need to be stood in melee. You need to be stood with your Golem, right? You need to be with him so that he gets all of those nice bonuses from being close to you, and that generally means that you're going to be standing right in the action. But like I said, you know, you're not exactly squishy, but you're definitely not a barbarian in regards to like just being able to face tank absolutely everything. So you will have to be pretty on the ball with dodging stuff. You need to make good use of your blood mist as well. And yeah, just generally being aware of what's going on a little bit more. But I mean, you could spin that into a positive. Obviously, you know, having to actually pay attention to stuff can make a build more fun. There are times where I almost fall asleep at the keyboard with some builds, but I mean, you know, at other times that's also a positive. It depends whatever way you want to spin it. But this is definitely for now my go-to recommendation for the Necromancer for all types of content as well. It's a great speed farmer. It's a fantastic leveler. I really like this for leveling. And then it also has the highest clears in the pit currently. So definitely a easy recommend. But don't forget, you do have skeletal mages if you prefer to stay at ranged. And then of course you do still have the Ebonblight build if you prefer what I feel like is a more warlock style build where you just dot everything down and it all dies. You could argue that that is maybe a little bit better for speed farming, because you don't have to kind of wait for your minions to hit them. You just dot them and leave. But yeah, I mean, all in all, Necromancer eating really good this season. And you have to let me know, which build do you end up going with? Is there any that you feel like perhaps should have been on this list that I could cover next time? Leave that down in the comments below. But I mean, at the end of the day, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something new. Again, consider giving the video a like, subscribe to the channel for more Diablo content. Really helps the channel out, and I really do appreciate it. So yeah, until next time, take care of yourselves, and love ya. Bye.